Well, today's topic is protesters. Now, I think sometimes, once in a great while, a protest can be valid and intelligent. But today, what I see is really dumb protesters. And I'm going to tell you a story about the protesters against the Shah that, it must have been 20 years ago, but that's today's topic. Okay, a few years ago, I was on a little visit to Washington, D.C. That's the U.S. Capitol for those who don't know about that. Okay, and in front of the Capitol was a whole bunch of protesters with signs saying things like, "The Shah must go." And they were talking about the Shah of Iran. Well, I was not so well informed about what was going on in the world, but I knew there was a fellow in Iran who sat in a peacock throne, and he spent a lot of money on palaces. But in Iran, which I had visited, it was kind of like a nice European country. People, I think they were basically Muslim, but they didn't wear that burqa. They didn't cover their face. There were restaurants, there was theaters. Kids were going about their business. It was like a European or an American big city. That was the capital. Okay. So I'm wondering what these people are protesting about. Well, when you have a good country and a good life, maybe the Shah is spending a little too much on palaces, but it seemed to be a very prosperous place with, press freedom. It was okay. So when this protest died down a little and the kids, that were mostly students, went to a restaurant, I went in there, and I wasn't so much of a different age at that time. It was a long 50 years ago. And I said, "So what are you protesting about? You've got a very good country. Obviously, if you're here going to school, subsidized by either your country or your parents, you've got a very good life. And what's going to come after?" And they said, "Well, there's this guy in Paris. Was it Khomeini or anyway? Well, there was a very ultra-religious guy in Paris who said we have to end the corruption and get rid of the Shah and have a Muslim government." Now, I'd also traveled a lot in North Africa and in many Arab countries, and one thing I can tell you is that in a Muslim government, the freedom is a lot less than other places. In other words, forget gays and lesbians, they're killed. If a man wants a divorce from one of his 4 or 5 wives, 4 wives actually, he makes up a story to get his wife stoned to death. So they bury the women about up to here, and then everybody, including their own kids, throws stones at them until they're dead. Then talk about infidelity. I'm not sure. I was reading at one point somebody was a woman maybe had an affair with somebody else, and she was taken out to the public square and whack off with her head. So if a religious Muslim cleric like this, I don't think his name was Khomeini, the original one, was it? Khomeini, okay. If he's going to take over, these kids who are living in a liberal country are going to be in very bad shape. And so I said to these guys, an old Confucian proverb, be very careful what you wish for, because sometimes the things you wish for, if they come true, are not so good for you. Well, to make a long story short, the Shah was overthrown, and he went to the only country that would have him. I think it was Panama, yeah, Panama. And he had enough money to build himself a nice little palace there on the water. And he retired. I remember he had kidney stones. He had a lot of problems after that. But the Shah was pretty well out of the picture. And these religious guys took over Iran. And the next thing was a lot of horror stories. For instance, women had to wear veils. They had to have their face covered. They had to wear a black tent. Women's rights, forget it. There were no more women's rights. And I don't know what happened to these students, but I think most of them moved to California and stayed there. And there's a big, huge Iranian colony. And I went to see one of my friends there who happened to be Iranian. And he says, I don't know where all these people running Iran now came from. They must have been hiding under rocks. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, we weren't like crazy, fanatically religious people. And now these fundamentalist Muslims have taken over, and they're talking about reestablishing the ancient Muslim world all over the Mediterranean and all over Europe. He says, the whole idea is crazy. Well, I agree with him. So to wind up my story, one more event. Although I think this might have happened in a different Muslim country. There was a fire in a girls' school. And the girls were trying to get out, but they didn't have time to put on their burqas and their face masks and all that. So the moral police said, well, we have to lock the doors. And if they burn to death, too bad. We can't have these young girls walking around a public street without being fully covered. So, my God, I don't know, can you relate to this? It's better that kids, young girls, burn to death than that they go out on the street for 10 minutes without their burqas. Crazy, crazy. So, when I see these demonstrations today, queers for Palestine? Come on. Anybody who is gay or lesbian lives in Gaza is killed, bang, dead. So what is this all about? It's just hard for me to relate to it. And this is going to be one of my shorter videos. I would be glad to see any comments. But it's just anybody who supports a fundamentalist religious theocracy is a little bit, well, I won't even say stupid, but that's my opinion. I wonder what it is that causes young people who don't even understand or know what they're protesting to go out and protest everything. I once had a kid, well, I still have the same kid, and whenever there was something to protest about, you could be sure she's out there, if not leading the parade, in the front row, carrying some kind of sign. And I had many an argument with her when she was young, because I think the first thing she protested was something about India. Or maybe it was South Africa. Yeah, it was apartheid in South Africa, but also something in India. Okay, so she's protesting. And I said to her, look, if some Indian girl, your age, 16 years old, is very religious, let's say whatever religion they are in India, I guess it's Hindu, and she's protesting that Catholics or Protestants or Jews in America should become Hindus, and is screaming and yelling to that effect, and going to the equivalent of hootenannies which in the old days was like you go to a tavern and you raise your glass and you protest. Some Indian girl is doing that. How the heck does that affect you in New York City? No, it don't affect you. So, but she couldn't get that through her head. Now the same young lady, my kid, she was then in a protest for burning oil. This was, Save the World was just becoming fashionable. It wasn't the big thing it is, or it became, but she wants to save the world and stop burning oil, and people should not use cars. They should use public electric transport, and no oil heating in homes. And I think she might have climbed up an oil tank and waved a banner and maybe even got arrested. Okay, now the same young lady then protests at a coal mine. Don't burn coal. And then when the nuclear plant opens up, hey, no nuke. Now, a couple years later, there's a brownout, no electricity, and she goes to protest that. She doesn't see the link that if you don't generate electricity one way or another, you don't have electricity. But she wanted electricity. Oh yeah, she has to turn on the lights and do that kind of stuff. So there's this young lady now who started her big protest when she was about 13 years old. I don't really need to take the advice of people like that, and yet other young people are very inspired by these protests, and they keep going on and on and on without really a full understanding of what they're protesting about and the result. I think there's people talk about the unexpected results, which often happens when there's a law passed. A law gets passed to encourage something, but it has the opposite effect in real life. So I guess my message is, personally, you'll never see me in a protest or leading one or carrying a banner or a sign, because most of the time it's a waste of time, and the people who are running these protests very often, I remember in the communist days when there was a USSR and the USA had a different policy, the communists in America would really get big crowds, 100,000 people, to give the Russian line. Unbelievable. And the newscasts were trying to be balanced, so they would give the Russian point of view and the US point of view when it's like the communist Chinese today. They want to take over little islands in the China Sea that have long been claimed and occupied by other countries, and there isn't anything to be balanced about. It's just common sense. And so my end thought today is that before you go into any protest, use your common sense and think about the result of what you wish for, because more times than not it's going to be something unexpected. Well, I'd expect it, but the protesters don't, and you get in a much worse situation than where you started. End of chit chat for today.